Chapter 1. Home. On a frigid February morning in Minnesota, the tension within the walls of Julio Chavez's modest home matched the icy chill lingering in the air outside. The sharp words that flew between him and Maria, his wife, left a jagged edge on what had started as a serene winter's day. Finances, the root of so many household tensions, had taken the stage last night, leading to a heated debate that had extended into the small hours. "You're too soft on Miguel. Every time he gets into trouble, you're right there, bailing him out instead of letting him face his consequences. We can't keep doing this, Julio. We just can't afford it." Maria's frustration was evident, her voice a mix of worry and weariness. The burden of their financial strain was etched deeply into her gentle features. Julio, a man not given to many words, responded with a simmering silence that conveyed his dissent. He knew Miguel's choices had been less than ideal, but he couldn't abandon his cousin when he needed help the most. His sense of family duty was as strong and unwavering as the sturdy roofs he built. Unable to find common ground, the couple's conversation had ended with more silence than solution. The following morning, the quiet stood between them like a wall of ice. Julio, in search of some reprieve, retreated into his truck, the steady hum of its engine blending with the soft exhales of his cigarette smoke. It was then that he noticed a voice message from Tom Anderson, unexpected, but a welcome distraction from the domestic Cold War. Tom's voice crackled through the speaker. "Hey, Julio, I've got an emergency here. The damn roof's caving in. Can you make it out to Brickwood tomorrow?" The urgency in Tom's voice was like a lifeline, a chance for Julio to escape the confines of conflict and the ever-tightening noose of money troubles. Julio hesitated, glancing at his mobile, then at the house where Maria was probably still stewing. He tapped record and left a brief message for his wife, his voice strained but calm. "I have to head out to Brickwood for a job. I'll be back later." There was an apology hidden between the lines, one that he found difficult to voice out loud. With the faintest sigh, he turned the key in the ignition, and the truck rumbled to life. As he drove, Julio tuned into the local radio station. The familiar voices of the broadcasters provided a soothing backdrop to his troubled thoughts. The morning DJ's playlist was a mix of classic rock and country ballads, each song a small escape from the heavy realities of life. The drive was usually straightforward, but today a blockade of emergency vehicles and heavy machinery greeted him just a few kilometers from Brickwood. A snow-induced roadblock barricaded the way, and downed electric poles lay like sleeping giants across the road. Julio rolled down his window, the winter air biting at his weathered face. "Hey, friend, the storm took down these lines. Gonna be a while before we clear this up," one of the workers, cloaked in a neon safety vest, yelled over the noise of the machinery. He pointed to a detour sign, adding, "You'll have to head up Old Mill Road. It's a bit out of the way, but it'll get you to Brickwood. Just stay sharp. It's a tricky path." Julio nodded his thanks and adjusted his route mentally, his fingers tracing lines on the well-worn map he kept on the passenger seat. As he veered onto the detour, a flash of red caught his eye in the rear-view mirror. A car, a red one, sleek and incongruous against the rough rural backdrop, seemed to appear and disappear at intervals behind him. Initially, Julio chalked it up to the winding nature of the road, but as the frequency of its appearances increased, a prickle of unease began to knit itself into his thoughts. "That's strange," he muttered to himself, focusing on the icy road that lay like a ribbon through the snow-laden landscape. The red car was a curiosity, but Julio's mind was already filled with too many worries to dwell on another uninvited mystery. The miles stretched on, the detour adding time and tension to his journey. The red car made a few more phantom-like appearances, always at a distance, close enough to rouse suspicion, but far enough to keep its intentions hidden. Julio had a job to do, a job he needed, and with each passing mile, he pushed the red car and its silent riddle further back into his mind, focusing on the task that awaited him in the quiet, seemingly deserted streets of Brickwood Creek. Chapter 2. The Conflict. Julio's pickup truck crunched over the frosted gravel of Old Mill Road, its tires leaving deep impressions in the snow, a stark contrast to the seemingly untouched blanket that lay across the town of Brickwood Creek. The sound of the truck's engine was a solitary growl in the stillness of the winter morning as he finally pulled into Tom Anderson's driveway. He killed the engine, and the abrupt silence felt heavy and imposing. Julio reached for his map and yellow book, slid them into the glove compartment, then pulled his knit cap down over his ears before stepping out of the truck. Tom's house, a two-story structure with weathered wood siding and double-hung windows that glared like unseeing eyes, stood quiet, almost desolate against the backdrop of skeletal trees and the undecided sky. Julio made his way to the door, his boots leaving a solitary trail, his breath visible in the sharp, cold air. He knocked, once, twice, waiting with a roofer's patience, but as the minutes ticked by, with no response, a thread of doubt weaved through him. Was the job still on? The whole town seemed to be hibernating, and for a moment, Julio wondered if he'd made the wrong decision coming out here. Just as he was about to turn back, the crunch of snow under heavy boots announced Tom's presence. From around the side of the house emerged the broad-shouldered figure of the hardware store owner, dragging a deer behind him, its antlers leaving trails like calligraphy in the snow. "Julio." Tom's voice was robust, a touch of surprise and relief in his tone. "Didn't think you'd make it through the storm. You're a godsend, man." Julio offered a nod, the unease over the silent red car momentarily forgotten. "Roads blocked. A storm took out the lines. Had to take Old Mill Road." Tom wiped his brow with a gloved hand, glancing at the deer before locking eyes with Julio. "That's a rough ride. I'm glad you're here, though. Let's get to it." Together, they moved to the side of the house where a ladder lay buried in the snow. Julio unfurled his tape measure, his experienced eyes scanning the damage as he shook the ladder free. The roof was worse than he'd imagined. A perfectly circular hole gaped ominously against the grey sky, like the mouth of an abyss. The edges were clean, curiously so, as if cut by a surgeon's scalpel rather than the random chaos of a storm. Tom leaned over Julio's shoulder, a frown creasing his brow. What the hell could have done this? Julio stepped back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "I've seen hail damage, storm damage. But this? It's as if it was punched through with precision. No scatter, no debris, and beneath it, your ceiling is undisturbed. That's not natural." Tom's eyes widened, his rustic features etched with confusion. "I swear it wasn't like that yesterday. It happened overnight, I suppose. Does this mean it's going to cost more?" Julio sniffed, a wry smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. He knew roofs, and he knew this wasn't going to be a quick patch job. "Yeah, Tom, I'm afraid so. This requires special handling. I'll need more materials, and it's going to take longer to fix." A shadow of frustration passed over Tom's face, but then he nodded, resigned. "Do what you must, Julio. Can't have the place falling apart on me." While Tom dragged the deer to his shed, Julio set to work. He climbed the ladder, measuring and inspecting, his mind racing with questions about the hole. But as he worked, the image of the red car began to thread its way back into his thoughts, the way it seemed to appear and vanish, a ghostly presence on his journey here. As the day wore on and the sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the snow, Julio noticed the garage door ajar and the unmistakable glint of red from within. Curiosity piqued, Julio momentarily paused his work, his gaze fixed on the slightly ajar garage door. The faint glint of red from within hinted at the presence of the mysterious car he had seen earlier. As he contemplated investigating, Tom suddenly emerged from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. "Hey, Julio, heading to the woods to gather some firewood," Tom called out, his voice echoing slightly in the cold air. "Radio reports it's going to be the coldest night from... never mind. I'll be back later." With that, Tom hastily closed the garage door and walked briskly towards the woods. In the silence that followed, a dog appeared at the small window of the basement, barking fiercely, its sounds filled with warning and distress. It sniffed the air as if searching for something, its eyes darting around restlessly. Then, as abruptly as it had appeared, the dog settled into a tense, waiting stance at the window. Julio watched the scene, a sense of unease growing within him. The dog's behavior seemed more than just the usual protective instincts. There was a palpable tension, an undercurrent of fear, or perhaps recognition of something unseen. Minutes ticked by, and the winter sun began its descent, casting elongated shadows across the snowy landscape. Tom reappeared, his arms laden with firewood. Just before he came into view, the dog suddenly ran off, as if driven by fear or alerted by a movement in the bushes that Julio couldn't discern. Tom, noticing Julio's observation, offered a quick explanation. "Ah, that's just Buster. He gets skittish sometimes. Must have seen a rabbit or something." Julio nodded, though Tom's explanation did little to dispel the unease that had settled in his gut. The dog's behavior, coupled with the fleeting glimpse of the red car and Tom's hurried actions, added layers to the mystery enveloping the day. As Julio watched Tom head off with the firewood, the unsettling feeling refused to abate. The day's events, each more peculiar than the last, wove a tapestry of uncertainty that clouded his thoughts. With a final glance towards the spot where the dog had vanished, he turned his attention back to the task at hand, the mystery of the red car lingering in his mind like an unsolved riddle. Chapter 3. Deepening Mystery. The day was bleeding into dusk, the sky a canvas of soft oranges and purples, as Julio wandered towards the shadowed recesses of Tom's garage. The red car that had teased his periphery throughout the journey seemed to wait there, proprietary amongst the mundane tools and oils that filled the space. It was a splash of color in a grayscale world, an anomaly. He approached it with the careful steps of a man not entirely sure of his reality. The car was there, vivid as ever, but it was the pristine nature of it, the spotlessness, that set the tendrils of suspicion creeping up his spine. Julio's rough hands hovered over the bonnet, seeking the telltale warmth of an engine recently cooled, but before his fingertips could confirm his suspicions, a voice behind him sliced through the quiet of the garage. "Julio, heading out." Tom's silhouette filled the doorway, throwing a long shadow that seemed to merge with the growing darkness of the garage. Julio withdrew his hand, a jolt of awkwardness seizing him. He stood up straight and faced Tom, trying to mask his investigative intent with a casual grunt. "Yeah, just about. Was checking if I'd left anything behind." Tom's eyes flicked to the car and then back to Julio, a glint of something unreadable passing behind his gaze. "Appreciate the hard work today. I've added a bit extra for the trouble," he said, holding out an envelope thick with the promise of desperately needed cash. Julio accepted the payment, the paper crackling between his fingers, a balm to his financial worries. "It was a strange job," Julio confessed, the weight of the day spilling over. "That hole. I've never seen anything like it." "Mysteries of the old Brickwood, huh?" Tom managed to chuckle, although it lacked any genuine mirth. "You coming back tomorrow, then?" "I will," Julio lied, eager now to leave the orbit of this place, the car, and the man with too many unspoken secrets. "I'll start first thing." Their farewells were succinct, professional, but as Julio turned to walk away, he could still feel Tom's eyes on him, perhaps measuring his suspicions, or perhaps already calculating the need for more deception. Julio let out a breath that hung viscerally in the air, his mind agitating with unanswered questions. The red car seemed to watch him go, a sentinel to whatever truth lay tucked away in Tom's quiet words and the strange phenomena of the day. The drive home was an anxious whisper of thoughts that circled like crows over a field, unsettling and persistent. Later, safe in the confines of his truck, he replayed the events, trying to piece together the incongruities that refused to align. The spotless red car that had shadowed him, the unnatural clean-cut hole in the roof, and Tom's unreadable expressions converged into a narrative that he was unequipped to read. The envelope in his pocket was a reminder that the world still demanded the mundane, the routine, but today had peeled back a corner of existence, revealing a sliver of the extraordinary, or perhaps the impossible. He looked in the rearview mirror one last time at the silhouette of Tom's house against the fading light as Old Mill Road stretched before him, promising the familiar and predictable comfort of home. Yet, underneath it all, the deepening mystery of the day left a lingering chill that was not entirely born of the winter's breath. As Julio drove away, the red car sat silent, a sentinel to the secrets that Brickwood Creek concealed beneath its tranquil veneer, and the sense of unease in Julio's gut told him that this was only the beginning of an unraveling he couldn't yet comprehend. Chapter 4. Unfolding Mysteries. The blizzard was relentless, a beast of nature that transformed the landscape into a treacherous white canvas. Julio Chavez gripped the steering wheel of his truck, squinting through the onslaught of snow and wind that battered the windshield. He hadn't expected the storm to escalate so rapidly, turning his routine drive home into a perilous odyssey. Each turn of the road seemed to taunt him with new hazards, the snow a relentless adversary obscuring his path. Seeking refuge, Julio spotted the faint glow of neon through the blinding snow. It was a bar, its lights a beacon of hope in the midst of the storm's fury. He maneuvered his vehicle into the parking lot, the tires crunching over the thick blanket of snow. The wind howled in protest as he opened the door, icy tendrils clawing at his coat as he hurried inside. The warmth of the bar enveloped him immediately, chasing away the chill that had seeped into his bones. The contrast was startling. The tempest outside seemed like a distant memory in this haven. The air was filled with the comforting sounds of subdued conversations and the crackling of firewood. A jukebox played a soft melody, its rhythm a soothing balm against the storm's cacophony. Julio made his way to the counter, brushing snowflakes from his jacket. The bartender, a man with a weathered face and kind eyes, greeted him with a nod. "Rough night to be out," he remarked, pouring a steaming cup of coffee. "Thanks," Julio murmured, accepting the cup. His gaze wandered across the room, taking in the faces of the other patrons, a small crowd that seemed to have found their own reasons to escape the storm's wrath. His eyes fell upon a picture hanging on the wall. It was an old photograph depicting a bright red car parked in front of an open field. The car seemed familiar, strikingly similar to the one he had seen parked at Tom's house earlier that day, and again on the road, a silent pursuer in the swirling snow. "You like the picture?" The bartender's voice pulled Julio from his thoughts. Julio nodded, his curiosity piqued. "It's an interesting car," he replied, his voice tinged with a note of false casualness. The image gnawed at him, an uninvited guest in his thoughts. The bartender turned to him, a smile breaking across his features. "It was my dad's pride and joy," he said, his tone tinged with nostalgia. "Took that picture the day he bought it. Shame he never really got to enjoy it." Julio's heart skipped a beat. As the fog in his eyes began to regain focus, his mind jolted as if trapped in a dream. For a fleeting moment, he saw Tom's face staring back at him with a penetrating gaze. But, as his consciousness sharpened, the illusion morphed into reality, revealing the bartender's face. It bore an uncanny resemblance to Tom, like a mirror image, save for the years etched onto the man's features. "What will it be, sir?" The bartender's voice cut through Julio's stupor, his tone casual, devoid of any hint of recognition. Julio froze, the words catching in his throat. He stared at the bartender, his mind racing to reconcile the face before him with Tom's. The resemblance was uncanny, disturbingly so. Was this merely a coincidence or something more? The silence stretched on, the bartender waiting petently, a mask of professional indifference on his face. A minute passed, feeling like an eternity as Julio wrestled with his thoughts. The ambient noise of the bar seemed to recede into the background, leaving him in a bubble of isolation with the bartender, Tom's doppelganger. The surrealism of the moment weighed heavily on him, blurring the lines between reality and imagination. Finally, Julio managed to gather his wits. "Just a tequila, please," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper, hoping the liquid fire might burn away the fog in his mind. As he sipped the drink, he recounted the day's strange events to the bartender. The man listened, his expression a mask of polite interest, revealing nothing. "Strange day, huh?" the bartender commented when Julio finished. "You have no idea," Julio replied, his gaze drifting back to the picture. It was as if the photograph held a piece of the puzzle, taunting him with its silent mystery. Needing a moment to himself, Julio excused himself to the restroom. Inside the cramped booth, he splashed cold water on his face, trying to wash away the surrealism that clouded his reality. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, searching for answers in his own eyes. But what he saw made his blood run cold. In the mirror, he saw not just his own reflection, but another presence, a duplicate of himself seated on the toilet, his face buried in his hands. Julio spun around, his heart pounding, but the booth was empty. Fear gripped him, a maze of confusion and eerie encounters constructing itself within his psyche. The red car, the inexplicable resemblance, the bartender's nonchalance, and now this impossible reflection. Giulio stepped back into the bar. He glanced around, his breath catching in his throat. The patrons he had seen earlier, once distinct individuals, now appeared as duplicates of each other. Two elderly men at the corner table, both with the same weathered face, shared a laugh, their movements eerily synchronized. A group of women by the window mirrored each other's gestures, their laughter a haunting chorus. Giulio's mind raced, struggling to comprehend the surreal tableau unfolding before him. Was this a trick of the mind? A psychological breakdown spurred by the day's strangeness? Or was there something truly unexplainable at play in Brickwood Creek? He stumbled to his seat, his gaze darting around the room. The duplicated patrons seemed oblivious to their bizarre nature, engrossed in their conversations and drinks. The bartender, still the spitting image of Tom, moved behind the counter, his actions normal yet unnerving in their familiarity. A cold sweat broke out on Julio's forehead as he grappled with the reality warping around him. The boundaries between illusion and truth blurred, leaving him in a limbo of fear and disbelief. He tried to speak, to ask for help, but words failed him, choked by the rising panic. In his desperate search for something, anything that remained anchored in the real, his eyes fell once more on the photograph of the red car. It seemed to be the only constant in this maddening world, a silent witness to the unraveling mystery. He leaned closer, studying the image. The man beside the car. Was it really the bartender's father, or another piece in the puzzle of duplicity? Julio's mind whirled with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. As he fixated on the photograph, the murmurs of the bar faded into a distant hum. The storm outside raged on, a relentless force that felt inextricably linked to the chaos within. Julio felt a deep, inexplicable connection to the storm, as if it was an external manifestation of his inner turmoil. The sound of glass shattering snapped Julio out of his trance. He turned to see one of the duplicate patrons standing, his expression twisted in anger. The man's doppelganger remained seated, an image of calm indifference. Julio watched, frozen, as the angry man stormed out of the bar, slamming the door behind him. The remaining duplicate didn't react, continuing his drink as if nothing had happened. The surreal dissonance of the scene sent a fresh wave of dread through Giulio. He realized then that he couldn't trust his senses in this place. Brickwood Creek was more than just a small town caught in a storm. It was a labyrinth of secrets and illusions, a place where reality seemed to fracture and warp. With a sense of urgency, Julio knew he had to leave, to escape the suffocating grip of the bar and its mirrored inhabitants. He rose unsteadily, his legs feeling like lead, each step a battle against the oppressive atmosphere. Caught in this enigma, Julio Chavez, a simple roofer from Minnesota, realized one undeniable truth. This was no ordinary storm, no ordinary bar, and certainly no ordinary day. The mysteries that had unfolded around him since morning were far from over, and neither was he. Chapter 5. The Escalation. Julio's heart hammered in his chest as he stood at the threshold of the bar, the inexplicable scene behind him. With a jolt of adrenaline, fear mingling with confusion, he pushed through the door, stepping back into a world that felt frighteningly unfamiliar. The icy wind clawed at his face as he emerged outside, but it was the sight that greeted him that froze him in place. His truck sat in the parking lot, but beside it, as though reflected in a distorted mirror, sat another exactly the same. The fog had lifted, yet the world it revealed was more disconcerting than any shrouded landscape could be. He pinched himself, hoping for the stinging reassurance of reality, but the duplicate vehicles remained. His breath turned to steam in the frigid air, his mind racing, trying to piece together a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit. Was this a dream? An elaborate hoax? Or was he truly losing his grip on sanity? Shaking his head in a futile attempt to dispel the nightmare, Julio staggered to his truck. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking uncontrollably. He had to get home, to Maria, to the warmth and safety of the familiar. As the engine roared to life, he cast one last glance at the other vehicles, each one paired with an unerring copy. It was as if the universe itself had slipped, leaving behind echoes of what should be singular truths. Once on the road, the snow seemed to fall with renewed vigor, a curtain of white obscuring his vision, the truck's powerful headlights struggling against the tempest's veil. He reached for the radiophone, dialing the police with numb fingers, the only lifeline he felt he had left. "Brickwood PD, Officer Johnson speaking," came the response, a beacon in the whiteout. "I need help, someone's following me." Julio's voice shook as he spoke, eyes darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a phantom vehicle tailing him. "Sir, it's a blizzard out there. Are you sure you're not just seeing things?" Skepticism laced Officer Johnson's voice, tinged with concern. "No, I'm telling you, there's something wrong in this town. There are copies of everything, copies of people." Julio's explanation tumbled out in a frantic stream, the words jumbling together like the crazy thoughts in his mind. There was a pause, the officer perhaps weighing the credibility of Julio's claim. "Sir, it's highly unlikely anyone would be out in this weather, let alone following you. Please pull over, stay safe, and we'll come to you." But Julio couldn't stop, not now. The shadows seemed to press in on him, the snow a relentless adversary. As he recounted the impossibilities of his day, his attention divided between the conversation and the treacherous road disaster struck. A patch of black ice, a momentary lapse in concentration, these were the precipices on which fate turned. The truck spun, a terror-filled ballet across the slick tarmac. Julio's voice was a strained cry as the vehicle hurtled off the road, the world tilting violently. A deafening crash reverberated as metal met wood, the truck embedding itself in the side of a wooden shed. The force flung Julio forward, his head striking the steering wheel as the glass of the windshield spider-webbed around him. For a moment there was stillness. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the shattered window, a soft counterpoint to the chaos of moments before. The radio crackled, Officer Johnson's voice a distant echo. "Sir, sir, can you hear me?" Julio's consciousness flickered, caught between the shadows encroaching at the edges of his vision and the stark, painful reality. Voices seemed to murmur from the depths of the forest, whispers carried on the wind. Or were they simply in his head? The duplicates, the bartender, the red car, all swirled into an indistinct maelstrom that threatened to swallow him whole. In this semi-conscious state, shadows began to take form, moving towards him with purposeful intent. A sense of profound dread washed over him as the figures drew nearer, their features obscured by the falling snow, but their intent all too clear. The world of Brickwood Creek, with its unnatural duplications and inexplicable phenomena, was closing in on him, its secrets clawing their way to the surface. And as the darkness claimed him, Julio Chavez realized that the weirdness of the day was not yet finished. It was only just beginning. Chapter 6. The Surreal Turn. Julio's mind floated in a fog of semi-consciousness, snippets of his day bleeding into a dreamscape, unfolding in horror-filled flashes. The rhythmic dragging of his body across the snow-covered ground barely registered, the vibrating hum of the red car's engine muffled by the howling of the wind. It was only the sharp jolt, the cold metal clasp of the trunk against his back, that jerked him into a jagged awareness. His eyes flickered open, trying to focus on the silhouettes against the blizzard's wrath. 3 Toms, identical, their movements synchronized, lifted him with an ease that belied his stature. The world spun as he was transported through the snow-swept night, the red car's trunk devouring him in darkness. Time seemed irrelevant in his enclosed cocoon of terror. When the journey ended, a dimly lit room greeted his reeling senses, the gentle click of the trunk indicating his temporary tomb had been breached. The Toms, silent sentinels, drew him out and into a house that felt both foreign and painfully familiar. Bound to a table, the straps across his chest and limbs felt like serpents, cold and unyielding. The room's air was thick with an electrical charge, his skin prickling with the static of unseen forces at play. Pain throbbed at the edges of his vision, each beat of his heart a countdown to an unknown fate. To his side, 2 figures sat motionless, their eyes vacant, the stark whiteness startling against their pallid skin. They were Toms, replications devoid of the original's charisma, their stillness more terrifying than any animated threat. Above him, suspended in midair, a holographic image of himself rotated slowly, the details minutely accurate, yet soullessly captured. A shiver ran through his body, not from the cold, but from the unnatural ambience that enveloped him. He wanted to shout, to rage against his restraints, but his voice was a mere rasp, lost amidst the strangeness of the scene. Tom approached the real Tom, carrying a device that emanated a soft, pulsating light. He noticed, with a mix of revulsion and bewilderment, the trance-like toms muttering in a cadence that was unmistakably alien. The sounds twisted through the air, a symphony of chilling, otherworldly whispers that seemed to echo from the depths of space itself. Before Julio could attempt to decipher the nightmarish tableau, a siren's wail shattered the silence, the flashing of blue and red lights casting the room in stark, contrasting shadows. The officer, responding to Julio's frantic call, had braved the tempest and arrived at a moment that seemed precariously balanced between life and a terrible, unknowable void. The toms turned, a collective mechanical response to the intrusion, and for an instant the operation paused. The red and blue lights bathed the room in a surreal dance, the clash of human law and alien agenda hanging palpable in the air. Officer Johnson's voice filtered through the chaos, authoritative yet tinged with incredulity. The door burst open, gun drawn, his eyes widening at the sight of the abomination unraveling before him. "Police! Don't move!" he commanded, his voice a lifeline thrown into the sea of madness that threatened to drown Julio. Julio's chest heaved with a jagged breath, hope igniting within him at the sight of the officer. The room's eerie quiet collapsed, giving way to a cacophony of otherworldly language and the heartbeat of human justice. The clash was not just of worlds but of existences, and Julio Chavez, roofer, husband, human, lay at the epicenter of an alien conspiracy that had unfurled its tendrils deep within the core of Brickwood Creek. Chapter 7: The Conspiracy. The sharp report of a gunshot reverberated through the old timber walls of Tom Anderson's home, followed by the clatter of something heavy tumbling to the ground above. Dust motes danced in the air, unsettled by the disturbance. Julio, who lay immobilized on the table, watched with a primal terror as the duplicate toms, once animated with an unnatural purpose, crumpled like marionettes whose strings had been severed. The surreal scene unfolded as if time had slowed, each moment inscribed painfully in Julio's memory. Officer Johnson's voice boomed from the attic, tinged with alarm. "Stay down," he ordered, his words hewn with the experience of a man accustomed to such exigencies, but never anything quite like this. Julio, seizing the momentary chaos, writhed against the straps that bound him. His breaths came in short gasps, the icy chill of the room now feeling like the biting cold of a grave. He twisted and tugged, fueled by adrenaline and a will to survive that surpassed any physical restraint. The straps, however, held firm, indifferent to his desperation. From the shadows of the room another figure emerged, the remaining duplicate Tom, resilient to whatever had felled its counterparts. It moved towards Julio with a determined stride, its motives unreadable in the silent calculation of its alien mind. Officer Johnson, hearing the commotion, sprinted down from the attic, his frame filling the doorway. His eyes met Julio's for a split second, a harrowing understanding passing between them before he lunged at the advancing duplicate. The creature, taken by surprise, stumbled. The officer's momentum carried them both in a tangled heap against the nearby wall. Grunts filled the room, the sound of human struggle against a foe defying the very nature of Earth's life. Julio, with a Herculean effort, born from the depths of fear, finally tore one arm free. His fingers ached as he pried at the remaining straps, the synthetic material scraping his skin raw. Freeing himself fully, he rolled from the table, his legs unsteady beneath him. "You okay?" Johnson yelled, grappling with the duplicate, his voice strained under its otherworldly strength. Julio nodded, even though the officer's focus was solely on restraining the alien copy. Scanning the room frantically for a weapon, a blunt tool, anything, he laid eyes on Tom's device, the one that pulsed with an eerie light. He lunged for it, hands trembling as he aimed it at the duplicate, pressing what he hoped was a trigger. The device hummed to life, casting a beam that enveloped the creature in its glow. The duplicate Tom's movements became erratic, jerking wildly as if short-circuiting. Officer Johnson, seizing the opportunity, pinned it to the ground, cuffing its wrists with practiced efficiency. The creature laid still, its strange mutterings fading to silence. "Basement!" Julio gasped. "We need to check the basement." Without another word, they descended the creaking stairs into the dimly lit underbelly of the house. What met their eyes was an abomination of science fiction turned fact, a nightmarish tableau of foreign technology and biological oddities that smacked of alien origins. Within the constricted space, bulky pods sat in rows, their surfaces a sickly, iridescent sheen, while fragments of what appeared to be spacecraft debris littered the floor. A low hum, almost imperceptible, vibrated the air, a sound that seemed to resonate with a pulse not of this world. "Sweet Mother of God," Johnson whispered, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. Julio could only nod, his gaze locked on the pods. He approached them warily, leaning closer to examine their contents. Within, he saw the outlines of human shapes, their features obscured by a translucent membrane. His stomach churned at the sight. The revelation they were not alone in the universe was overshadowed by the sinister intentions of these visitors. They had replaced the townsfolk, duplicated them for some unfathomable purpose, turning Brickwood Creek into a facade of normalcy, hiding a malevolent scheme. "We need to call this in," Officer Johnson said, his voice steely with resolve. "We need backup, federal, military intervention." But Julio knew it wouldn't be that simple. The weather, the isolation, and the insidious nature of their enemy made their predicament dire. As their eyes met, a mutual understanding passed between them. They needed a plan, one far more tactical than merely calling for help. They were on their own, and the fight for their town, and perhaps humanity, lay squarely upon their shoulders. The whispering winds outside seemed to carry a chilling message. An alien invasion had descended upon Brickwood Creek, and it was up to a roofer and a police officer, two unlikely heroes, to peel back the layers of this cosmic conspiracy. Chapter 8. Run. The sound of splintering wood echoed in the chilling silence of Tom's basement. Officer Derek Johnson and Julio Chavez, each filled with the gravity of their grim discovery, cast fleeting glances at the grotesque assembly of alien pods. Time, they knew, was a luxury they could not afford. With tight lips and a resolve hardened by necessity, they swiftly rifled through the clutter. "Here," Johnson murmured, pulling an old hunting rifle and a box of shells from a dust-laden shelf. The weapon was a relic, a testament to someone's long-forgotten pastime, but in their hands it was reborn as a beacon of hope, a slender chance at survival. Julio, less familiar with firearms yet determined to defend himself, found a sturdy pipe wrench. Its solid weight in his hands offered a reassuring promise of defense. He watched as Johnson loaded the rifle with methodical precision, the clicks and snaps of the mechanism, a staccato overture to their planned escape. A glance through a grimy basement window offered them a view of the silent, snow-blanketed night. Johnson's sharp intake of breath drew Julio's attention to the cadre of duplicates staggering in the moonlight like somnambulists, drawn by some unseen puppeteer's strings. "They're transferring consciousness. It leaves them vulnerable for a moment," Johnson concluded, his voice betraying both horror at the revelation and calculation for their advantage. Julio nodded, shifting his grip on the wrench. "As soon as they start, we go for the car." They waited, obscured by darkness, as the night air filled with a low, otherworldly hum, a haunting prelude to the alien transference. One by one, the duplicates faltered, their movements sluggish and unsynchronized. "Now!" Johnson hissed, and they burst from the basement, darting through the maze of farm equipment and up the stairs. Emerging into the cold, their breaths crystallized in the air, they sprinted toward the parked police cruiser. The duplicates, caught in the grip of their bizarre ritual, barely registered the two men's presence. Julio fumbled with the passenger door, his fingers numb but driven by the adrenaline that surged through his veins. The door swung open, and he threw himself inside, grabbing the radio as Johnson shoved the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a defiant shout against the oppressive stillness of the alien night. Johnson slammed the car into gear, the tires spewing snow and gravel as they launched forward. A glance in the rearview mirror showed the duplicates return to eerie coordination. Their eyes, alight with the alien consciousness, locked onto the fleeing vehicle, and they began their pursuit. "Damn it, they're quick," Johnson muttered, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel as he maneuvered the cruiser through the treacherous landscape. Julio could only nod, his gaze darting between the road ahead and the encroaching figures in the mirror. With each twist and turn of the serpentine roads, the police cruiser skidded and fought for traction, the snow an unyielding adversary. A duplicate loomed ahead, its arms raised as if to command the vehicle to halt. Johnson reacted instantly, swerving with a skill born of years patrolling these rural routes. The cruiser danced past the obstruction, leaving the duplicate floundering in its wake. "Keep your eyes peeled, Julio. We're not clear yet," Johnson commanded, as the cruiser wound its way through the labyrinth of snow-drifted roads. Their escape was a symphony of strained engine roars and the hiss of tires against snow, a cacophony that heralded their desperate bid for freedom. Julio's hands tightened on the wrench, a silent prayer on his lips. The cruiser plowed on, a beacon of human defiance slicing through the cold heart of an alien winter. The road unfurled before them, a ribbon of fragile hope that they clung to with every fiber of their being. Their breaths came in ragged synchrony, a testament to the fear and the courage that propelled them into the unknown. They were two small silhouettes against the vast, indifferent expanse of the Minnesota night. Two souls joined in a fight not just for their own lives, but for the truth that Brickwood Creek, and the world, had to know.